The room held its breath. 300 people, musicians, producers, label executives, critics who had built careers on being impossible to impress, and not one of them made a sound. Not a cough, not a whisper. The only thing moving in that entire concert hall was the dust caught in the stage lights above the piano, drifting slow and golden like it had nowhere else to be. And at the center of it all sat a woman in a faded green cardigan, her hand still resting on the keys of a Steinway concert grand, her eyes closed, her face completely calm. The man who had put her there. The man who had laughed when she walked in. The man who had said the words he could never take back, was standing at the side of the stage with his jaw tight and his glass of scotch forgotten in his hand. But to understand what happened in that room, you have to understand what it cost to get there. Let me take you back. Nolan Briggs, 54 years old, had a gift for recognizing talent and an even sharper gift for reminding everyone that he was the one who had recognized it. He ran Briggs & Charter Music, a mid-sized production and artist development company out of Chicago, and for 22 years he had built it into something real. His roster had produced 4 Grammy nominees, 2 platinum records, 1 artist who had gone from his parking lot to a Super Bowl halftime show. He kept a framed copy of that Super Bowl program behind his desk, signed by the artist. Personally, Nolan was the kind of man who wore his success the way other men wear a good watch, not to tell the time, but to make sure you noticed. He flew business class for 2-hour flights. He had opinions about restaurants that hadn't opened yet. He called young producers kid even when they were 35. And when it came to musicians, Nolan Briggs had a theory he had repeated so many times it had calcified into a belief. Real talent announced itself. You walked into a room, and you felt it before the person even opened their mouth. It was in the posture, the confidence, the way they carried the work they'd done on themselves. Talent in Nolan's world looked a certain way. It did not look like Dorothea Voss. Dorothea Voss, 46 years old, had been a public school music teacher for 19 years. She'd taught at Caldwell Elementary in South Side, Chicago, the kind of school where the heating went out twice a winter and the piano in the music room had 3 keys that stuck, and one that had been missing entirely since 2019. She wore sensible shoes. She drove a 2011 Honda Civic with a cracked dashboard and a hand sanitizer bottle zip-tied to the cup holder. She did not have a manager, a press kit, or a social media presence beyond a Facebook account she updated maybe twice a year with photos of her students' recitals. She had been laid off 4 months earlier when the district cut its arts budget for the 3rd odd time. In a decade, she'd been told it was nothing personal. She'd nodded, thanked the principal, driven home, and sat in her car in her own dry driveway for 45 minutes without moving. That was October. By February, she had burned through most of her savings. She had started picking up private students on weekends, mostly kids whose parents had seen something in them, or thought they had, and were willing to pay $40 an hour to find out. Some of those kids were genuinely gifted. Most were 7-year-olds who wanted to play Let It Go and had the attention span of a golden retriever. Dorothea taught them all the same way. Patiently, precisely, like every single one of them was going to be something, because she believed they might. She had not touched her own music in 12 years, not since her mother died. Her mother, Grace Voss, had been the one who sat with her through every lesson, every recital, every rejection letter from every conservatory that had said no when Dorothea was 22 and still believed the world owed talent a fair hearing. Grace had driven her to auditions. Grace had pressed a cup of tea into her hands after the ones that didn't go well and said nothing. Just sat there, which was exactly the right thing to say. When Grace died of a stroke in her sleep, in the spring of Dorothea's 34th year, she left behind a small house in Evanston, a collection of ceramic owls, and a single handwritten note on the kitchen table that said, "You still have music in you. Don't let anybody bury it before you're ready to." Dorothea had framed the note, kept it on her dresser, looked at it every morning, and still, for 12 years, the music stayed buried. The way Dorothea ended up at the Hartwell Center that Saturday afternoon in March was the kind of thing that looks like coincidence until you look closer and realize it never was. One of her private students, a 12-year-old named Felix, whose mother, Pamela, taught corporate communications at DePaul, had mentioned to Pamela that his teacher was kind of incredible. Pamela had asked what he meant. Felix had said he didn't know exactly, but that sometimes when Ms. Voss played something to show him how it was supposed to sound, the whole lesson would just stop and everybody would be very quiet. Pamela, who was organized in the way that people who run things are organized, had filed that information away. 3 weeks later, Pamela ran into Nolan Briggs at a fundraiser for the Chicago Symphony. They were standing near the open bar, making the kind of small talk that fundraisers demand, when Nolan said he was thinking about launching a new initiative, a showcase for undiscovered Chicago talent, which he planned to call the Hartwell Sessions, and which would double, though he did not say this at the fundraiser, as excellent marketing for Briggs & Charter. Pamela had said, "I might know someone." That was how the call came. Dorothea had answered it on a Tuesday morning while she was grading a stack of theory worksheets at her kitchen table. She'd listened to the woman from Briggs & Charter explain that her name had come up in connection with a new showcase, that Mr. Briggs was always looking for genuine talent, that there would be a small audience of industry professionals, and the event was being filmed for promotional purposes, and would she be interested in coming into play? Dorothea had looked at the stack of theory worksheets. She had looked at the cracked mug on her kitchen table. She had thought about the 2011 Honda and the $40 lessons and the note on her dresser. She said yes. She almost called back 3 times to cancel. She did not. The Hartwell Center for the Performing Arts was everything Caldwell Elementary was not. Vaulted ceilings, brass fixtures, a lobby with floors so polished you could see the lights reflected in them. There were people in the atrium when Dorothea arrived, a cluster of them near the check-in table. People in blazers and leather portfolios, and the particular kind of casual dress that costs a lot of money to look effortless. They were the kind of people who stood in rooms like this, the way furniture belongs in rooms like this, like it had never occurred to them to feel out of place. Dorothea had dressed carefully. Dark slacks, a green cardigan that was nice but had a small pull near the second button she only noticed after she was already in the car, low heels she hadn't worn in 2 years, which she was now regretting. She gave her name at the check-in table. The woman there, young, efficient, headset around her neck, found it on the list and printed a badge without looking up. The other performers waiting in the side room were younger, a singer-songwriter with a custom acoustic guitar and the kind of cheekbones that photograph well. A jazz trio in matching blazers, a pianist named Derek, who, based on his conversation with the woman beside him, had studied at Berkeley and interned at 2 major labels and was now represented by someone he kept referring to as my guy at CAA. Nobody spoke to Dorothea. She sat in a folding chair near the door and held her bag in her lap and waited. Nolan Briggs came through the side room at 2:15, in the way that people come through rooms when they want you to know they're running the room. He made rounds, shook hands with the jazz trio, said something to the Berkeley kid that made the Berkeley kid laugh, spoke briefly to a tall woman with a violin case who seemed to already know him. When he got to Dorothea, he stopped, looked at the badge, looked at her. "Dorothea Voss," he said, the way you read a name off a list when you don't recognize it. "That's right," she said. "You're the piano player." "Yes." He looked at the cardigan, at the sensible shoes, at the lack of a portfolio, a manager, a guitar case, any of the accessories that, in his experience, talent used to announce itself. "What have you done?" he said, not unkindly. "Factually." "I taught school music for 19 years, she said. A pause. "Right," he said. That was the whole conversation. He moved on to the jazz trio. But here's the thing about Nolan Briggs that you need to know. He had already decided. You could see it in the way he'd looked at her badge, and then at her face. In the half-second pause before he said, "Right." He had not been unpleasant. That wasn't his style. He was too polished for open contempt. But in the quiet economy of how he distributed his attention, Dorothea Voss had been written off in the 30 seconds it had taken him to look her over. He would let her play. He was not a cruel man. But he had decided. The showcase was set for 4 p.m. The Hartwell's main performance hall seated 300, and it was full. Label reps, music journalists, a few local donors who funded the art scene and liked to be in rooms where things were being discovered. Nolan had opened the afternoon with brief remarks about the vision behind the Hartwell sessions, which he delivered without notes comfortably. The way a man delivers remarks, he has given versions of many times before. The jazz trio went first. They were excellent. The audience was warm. The singer-songwriter went second. He had a good voice and a beautiful guitar, and the kind of songs that sound important without being quite specific enough to break your heart. He got a strong response. Derek from Berkeley went third. He played a technically stunning original piece that impressed the musicians in the room and left everyone else slightly cold. Then Nolan returned to the microphone and consulted his card and said, "Our last performer today is Dorothea Voss, who has spent the last 19 years teaching music in Chicago public schools." There was a polite stir in the room. A few people near the back shifted in their seats. Someone near the front whispered something to the person beside them. Nolan said it without meaning to say it, or perhaps, and this was the more honest read, without caring that he was saying it, "Let's give her a chance." 3 words. Let's give her a chance. As if the other performers had not needed a chance. As if she were a charity case who had wandered into the wrong room, and they were all gracious enough to endure it. Dorothea was standing in the wings when she heard it. She took a breath. She walked out. The Steinway Concert Grand sat center stage under a single bright light, black and immense and indifferent to everything around it. Dorothea had not played on a Steinway Concert Grand in over 12 years. The last time had been at her mother's memorial service, when she had sat down because she could not find words and played instead a hymn Grace had loved, slow and full and precise, and when she finished there had been no sound in the room for a long time. She sat down now. She adjusted the bench. She set her hands in her lap for a moment without touching the keys. She could feel 300 people waiting, and then, before she played a single note, Nolan Briggs's voice came from somewhere near the stage left steps, half turned away, speaking to a charter colleague in what he thought was a quiet voice, but was not quiet enough. "What do you think she's going to play?" he said. "Hot cross buns?" A few people near him laughed. In the front row, Pamela, who had come to see this, closed her eyes. Dorothea heard it. She looked down at the keys. She thought of her mother. She played. The first notes were almost nothing. A single melodic line, right hand only, so spare and deliberate that for a moment the audience wasn't sure it had started. It felt more like the room was remembering something than like music was beginning. It was a hymn, an old one that most people in that room had heard somewhere in their lives without ever learning the name of it, the kind of melody that lives in the body rather than the memory. Then the left hand came in, and the room changed, not all at once. The way weather changes, you don't see the shift happen. You just look up at some point and realize everything is different. The hymn didn't stay a hymn. It opened the way a window opens onto something you didn't know was outside. The melody fractured into something that was part blues, part classical, part something that didn't have a name, and underneath it, a left-hand rhythm that was patient and deep and relentless, the kind of playing that you feel in your chest before your brain has caught up to what your ears are doing. The jazz trio, sitting in the wings, looked at each other. Derek from Berkeley set his water bottle down and didn't pick it up again. In the audience, people stopped looking at their phones. A woman in the third row, who had been making notes on a legal pad, set her pen down flat against the paper without meaning to. An A&R rep named Calvin, who had seen 10,000 showcases and prided himself on maintaining professional detachment, put his hand over his mouth. Nolan Briggs had moved to a spot just off stage where he could see the audience. He was watching them the way a man watches a room when the room is telling him something he doesn't want to hear. Dorothea played through the hymn and through the blues and into something she had written herself a long time ago, something she had never played for anyone but her mother. It was the piece she had composed, The Winter Grace Got Sick, in the months when she would sit at her mother's kitchen table and write music in the margins of whatever paper was available. Grocery receipts, the backs of envelopes, because she couldn't afford real sheet music and couldn't afford to let the music stop. She had never named it. She had never recorded it. She had carried it inside her for 12 years, like a letter she hadn't been able to send. She played it now. She played it the way you do something when you've been holding it for a long time, and the weight of it has become indistinguishable from the weight of yourself. Every register of the instrument, every dynamic, she built it from the barest thread of sound to something that filled every cubic inch of that hall, that pressed against the walls, that made the brass fixtures vibrate softly in their mounts, and then she brought it back down, slower than it had climbed, until it was just the melody again. Just one line, just her right hand, and then silence. The silence lasted 4 full seconds, then 300 people stood up. Nolan Briggs did not stand up immediately. He stood where he was, off stage, and he watched the audience, and his face did something complicated that the people near him would later describe differently depending on who you asked. Some said he looked stunned. One said he looked like a man who had just understood something. His assistant, Keisha, who had worked for him for 6 years and had heard him make the hot cross buns comment, said later that she had never seen him look like that before, and she had seen him in a lot of rooms. He walked out onto the stage as the applause was still going. Dorothea was standing now, still at the piano, and she looked not triumphant. That's the word that wouldn't fit. She looked like someone who had set something down after carrying it for a very long time. Relieved, quiet, still. Nolan crossed the stage and stood beside her. He took the microphone off its stand. The audience quieted. He said, "I owe this woman an apology." He said it plainly, without preamble, into 300 people. Before she played, I said something from the side of the stage that I thought was private and wasn't. It was disrespectful, and I was wrong. A pause. Not just about what I said, about everything I assumed before she sat down. Keisha, watching from the wings, thought, well. Nolan looked at Dorothea. I don't know what you want out of this. I don't know if you want a label or a deal or anything I can offer, but I would like very much to have a conversation if you're willing to have it. Dorothea looked at him for a moment. I'd like to hear the conversation first, she said. A beat. Then Nolan Briggs did something he did not often do in public. He laughed. Here is what happened in the weeks that followed, because the story does not end when the applause does. Calvin, the A&R rep in the audience, reached Dorothea before she had made it back to her car. He gave her his card and said, without the industry buffer he usually kept in place, "That was the most honest piano playing I've heard in 15 years. Please call me." She called him. The conversation with Nolan Briggs happened 10 days later in his office with the Super Bowl program visible behind his desk. He offered her a development deal. Not the standard terms, not the let's see how this goes structure he used for unproven artists. A real contract. Keisha, who sat in on the meeting, told her friend afterward that she had never seen him offer those terms to someone on a first conversation. Dorothea took the contract home. She sat with it for 3 days. She talked to an entertainment attorney. she found through Pamela. She negotiated 2 clauses, then she signed. The first project she recorded under Briggs and Charter was a solo piano album. No band, no production, no layering, just the Steinway and the music she had been carrying for 12 years. The title track was the piece she had played at the Hartwell, the one with no name, the one she had composed at her mother's kitchen table on grocery receipts and the backs of envelopes. She named it Grace. It was released on a Tuesday in November. By the following Monday, it had been streamed 2.3 million times. A review in the Chicago Tribune called it the most quietly devastating debut record of the year. From a musician who was always there and is only now visible. A jazz critic wrote that it sounded like someone who had been saving something important for the exact right moment, and finally, unambiguously, found it. Felix, her 12-year-old student, texted her a string of fire emojis. She replied with a thumbs up. Nolan Briggs did not become a different person overnight. That is not how people work, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. But his assistant, Keisha, noticed in the months after the Hartwell showcase that when new acts came in for meetings, he had started asking them a question he had never asked before. He asked them what they had been carrying, not what they'd done, not who had signed them, or who they knew, or where they'd studied, what they'd been carrying, what was in the music that had nowhere else to go. Some of them didn't understand the question. Those meetings tended to be short, but every now and then someone would pause. Really pause, the way Dorothea had paused before she touched the keys, and then they'd start to talk. And Nolan would lean forward, and the Rolex would go unnoticed on his wrist, and the Super Bowl program would hang unexamined behind his head, and for a little while the room would be about nothing except the thing the person across the desk had been waiting to say. Keisha told her friend it was the best version of him she'd seen. She didn't tell him that. She didn't need to. There is a photograph. One of the event photographers caught it. From the moment just after Dorothea finished playing, before she stood up, before the applause. She is still at the piano, her hands still resting on the keys, and her eyes are closed, and her face is doing something that is hard to describe. She is not performing. She is not posing. She looks the way a person looks when they have just said something they have needed to say for a very long time, and the saying of it has cost them something, and the cost was worth it. Pamela has that photograph framed in her office. Felix has it as his phone wallpaper, which he has not admitted to anyone. Dorothea has it too. It sits on her dresser now, next to the note her mother left. She still teaches piano on weekends. Not because she needs the $40 an hour, because she remembers what it felt like to have someone sit across from her and believe she might become something before she believed it herself. She teaches every student the same way, like each one of them is going to be something. Because she knows now, the way she always knew but could not quite hold on to, that buried music is not dead music. It is just waiting for the room to go quiet enough to hear it.